So we're going to start. The first talk is on the network analysis and management of Hudson Valley Current. And first we shall hear from Chris, just briefly, and then I will.
Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm Chris Hewitt. I'm the director of the Hudson Valley Current. We have three primary projects. One is the Current, our local currency, a newspaper called Livelihood that is published by the local currency, and a campaign called Satisfy Hunger that shows how a local currency can feed people in need. And I think I met Leanne about 3 or 4 months ago, and she's been analyzing our data, and I've been learning a lot from her. Without further ado.
And vice versa. I came to local currencies about 6 months ago, so I'm more a monetary theorist in the non-alternative world, in the orthodox world. So, oops. Oh, sorry. Great. Okay, so the goal of this paper is that first, it's a visual description of the Hudson Valley Current, of its network. So I'm going to, in a sense, map the network and think about how to manage that network. I would have to say this paper is still a work in progress. So we're delving into, we've done some of this, delving into this. And a fourth goal for me personally is to use complementary currencies to teach. So I teach finance, macroeconomics, and so I believe that as a pedagogical tool, local currencies are very useful for my students to have hands-on contact with data and architecture, monetary architecture. So the Hudson Valley Current, let's just give a description. It has 379 members. It began in July 2013, and if we just look at members and their membership category, then we can see that consultants are a large proportion of what our membership is in the Hudson Valley. The Hudson Valley is north of New York City, on the way to the Erie Canal, and so it's about 2 hours north of Wall Street, so there are a lot of wealthy people from Wall Street who have their summer homes up there. The Rockefellers are up there, Johnson & Johnson are up there. There's a lot of old family estates, but there's also a lot of people who are of far lesser means. So the inequality there is really, I would say, quite large. So our membership looks like this, 379 members. Each title membership here is, again, weighted by number of members. But if we look at our membership, we're facing the same sort of problems that most local currencies face, in that this is our membership here from when it began, 2013. We have 379 enrolled, but we only have around 270 that have actually transacted, and then of those who are active, it rose to around 50 to 70, and it's pretty much stayed around there, although it's had a recent increase. So these are active members, and these guys have made a transaction in the past, this is the past 6 months, the green line, and the other is in the prior year. So we have about 50 people that are actively transacting, but there's a lot of people who have joined. What we are mapping is the digital currency. This currency is run on Cyclos, which is held by the Hudson Valley Current, which is the exchange system. And they have so far always had a digital system. It's a mutual credit system, so negatives and pluses cancel out. The Hudson Valley Current itself is allowed to go into debt, which is 50% of the members' credit line. So when you join up, you get an automatic 300 credit line. And the Hudson Valley Current is allowed to go, if you aggregate all the members together, is allowed to go 50% of that. That's according to the constitution of the Hudson Valley Current. But it is going to introduce paper currency late in October, later in the year. And so they have a QR code on that paper currency. There's a hope that when this is exchanged, it could be recorded at the shop if people choose to. There is a desire by some people, such as undocumented immigrants, who don't actually want to have even maybe their transactions, even though we're just following the money, but they actually prefer this paper currency as opposed to our digital currency where they do have to give in their details. By law, the Hudson Valley Current has to issue W-2 tax payments on the income. So everyone who earns an income has to pay taxes in dollars. So this is the architecture. It's in the paper, so it's perhaps a little small here. But what I'm describing here is the way that this system is designed. So we have here what I'm selecting as our categories of members: news, media, food and retail, farms, nonprofits. And they can endogenously issue money, just as in a mutual credit system. So I'm calling that the endogenous monetary system, which they can inject into the system, which circulates around. The Hudson Valley Current, I'm putting outside here, even though it is a member, just like as a member of this mutual credit system, it is a member. And I would treat this as the central bank. So this bank can actually control the supply of money in the system because it can exogenously, to a large extent, decide how much to inject and how much to drain out. The reason it can do that is it has a business behind it. So originally Chris began with a magazine, which has now reached 20,000 readers. And initially, that Hudson Valley Current was separate from, originally the Livelihood magazine was a separate entity from the Hudson Valley Current, but after a few months, they merged. And so we now have a local currency issuer that's backed by a business. And in effect, what that means is that this currency which they issue is backed by advertising in the magazine. So at any point that there might be an excess amount of credits in the system, and usually those credits are held with businesses, those businesses can come to Chris and use their currents to purchase advertising. And if they purchase advertising in currents, they get a 10% discount as opposed to dollars. So there's an incentive for them to purchase that advertising because either they have a buildup of currents and it gives them a discount. So that's done through the Livelihood magazine. So the Livelihood magazine drains currents from the system by issuing advertising. We also have what's called a general store. These are kind of like shell companies of the main account. The general store sells some of its assets, which also drains from the system, like t-shirts and things that it might have. And then the Hudson Valley Current is the primary fiscal authority that is spending money into the system. So this central bank and fiscal authority, Treasury, is very similar in my mind to MMT, to modern monetary theory, where you have a central bank or government that is hand in glove and deciding how much to spend into the system based on its goals. And the Hudson Valley Current's goals are to promote the local economy and to support nonprofits. So it pays for its wages, its expenses. It has some ratio, I don't actually know what the ratio is, Chris, that it's financed through a charity organization, Novo. The son of Warren Buffett is living up there, and so has been fortunate to give us, or Chris, a grant So there's a ratio there of operating expenses. A portion is done in currents and another portion is done in dollars, which they have through the organization. Okay, so
I'll talk about that more on Saturday.
yeah, and Chris is giving a potentially 2-hour session on Saturday. So this fiscal authority can spend into existence, and so it does a lot of charity activities, which Chris has said. So not only can you endogenously create currents through the membership, but you can have some fiscal spending, deficit spending into the system, and we can drain it by advertising. So in terms of just total transactions weighted by the amount of transactions, so those earning currents in the system are primarily consultants, some employees, a lot of them at the Hudson Valley Current, and there is the community account, which is our central bank, also has some income, various other community members. But in terms of spending, the big spender here is the Hudson Valley Community Current. It is this central bank that is primarily doing a large, we'll see exactly how much of these transactions. So here's a mapping. This is when it started. This is yearly data. So it starts in 2013, and this is New York City down here. I live over here somewhere. And so 2015. So we're just mapping this now. This is just a visual map. It reduced a little bit in 2017, but then we picked up in 2018. If I can get there. Yeah. So it's hard to see, but there's a river that goes all the way up here, and that's the Hudson River. This graph is I hope you can see this, but it's in the paper. So these are the total size of transactions on average. I've trimmed some of the outliers, but on average, the size is around, $60 per transaction, goes up to $100. This period it went down a bit, and then we're now around, on average, $120 per transaction. In terms of participation, at any 6-month period, we've got 200 people participating around here, and then, this is the red line. We've got starting at around 20 when it starts, and it's hovering around that between 50 and 70 mark, right, of the participants. Not always the same participants. They could be people that are coming and going, but we've got around 50 to 70 participants. And then in terms of transactions, the number of transactions, the volume we've got ranging between, it begins around 100 and it goes around 300. So we have around 300 transactions every 6 months. So it's still small, but it's an interesting example because if we just look at total buys, which is here going into debt, total buys, and total sales, the Hudson Valley Current of that total is this dark red line. So it's a significant player. It's still not as big as 200% of GDP, which is where Japan is, somewhere like that. We're still a fraction, but we're getting around 50% of GDP around here. And again, this is the question we have, right? How is it? Are we doing the right thing? That's my question as an economist. Are we doing the right thing by being a big spender in this economy? We have this backed by advertising. So we have businesses that can, if there is pooling in certain businesses, they can always come and purchase purchase advertising, actually I forgot to mention, there's also another way that we include businesses, is that Chris had this novel idea of issuing gift cards. Or the businesses issue gift cards. So for those businesses who don't want to participate in the Hudson Valley Current, but they do want to buy advertising, Chris is willing to barter with them and give them advertising for gift cards. And so gift cards are coming into, as an asset, into the central bank and being sold to members of the Hudson Valley Current. So they can use your current. So if I want to go to the restaurant tonight and I have lots of currents, I can always go and call Chris and purchase some gift cards. This is a second currency. We have one currency here, which is the digital one on Cyclos. We have script here. These businesses are issuing their own type of currency. And then we're introducing a paper currency, which is like, I would call it another type of currency. So getting back to where we are. So we are a significant player. But in this period is when there was the most activity in financing nonprofits. And which started around here. This is a measure of our velocity. So it doesn't look great. Starts around 3 and is falling down to around 30%. That, to some extent, is to be expected in an early introduction because there's a lot of people joining and not really participating. They might have used their currents. There are people who have them on their books. Some people have, 3,000 currents in their account, and they've just decided, I've left town, or I've just, walked away, and that is still part of my money stock. So I'm still measuring all those stagnant accounts. We haven't actually removed too many members, so members remain in the system. So we have these stagnant accounts that are pulling, weighing down, and reducing my measure of velocity. This measure of velocity is simply my total transactions over the period. So this is quarterly transactions in blue, over the total stock of debt. So I just add up all the debts. That's my total stock of money that I have in this system. But what we can see here is there was a big spurt here of transactions, but it was coming up and was raising up our velocity. Now, this was because there was this sort of, I don't know if it was a new campaign, but it was a campaign to start helping nonprofits. So we extended the credit line to nonprofits. And by extending that credit line, we asked them and looked at their what they would spend it on and see if it was feasible in the sense that they could pay it back. And if it was, they would be approved. And then they employed a lot of businesses, or even just maybe 1 or 2 businesses, to help them. Often this was creating web pages for my website. A place that has horses for autistic children to come and ride the horse could now get a line of credit and get a new web page from the business community. And those businesses were really good at spinning around this money and spending it. And that's just a few businesses by themselves were able to lift up this velocity. So most of our members, if we divide them up into business and services, 63 are in the business and services. And a lot of them are graphic designers, web page makers, accountants, this sort of thing. And we'll look again at this balance. Well, it's going to get a little crazy. So this is just showing you how those balances are growing. So you can see the Hudson Valley Current is spending, and of course, credits equal deficits. So we are, in a sense, pushing the other side into credit, right? So nonprofits who we've allowed to expand their spending, and our own non-profit spending, a lot of that is on community spending, is leading to credits here, but we've found that these guys are actually good at circulating it around. So, but, you know, so we're still left with a sort of a quandary. Here's another way to look at that same graph. This is sexual imbalances, quarterly, smoothed a bit. And so the blue line is the Hudson Valley Current. So whenever the Hudson Valley Current is a deficit, we are pushing the green guys, business services into business services and other. So we've got another category there. We're pushing them into credit, right? So that's always opposite. But there are times when you know, it depends on the causation, right? We don't exactly know the causation. We could work it out and think through who's pushing who. Because here we had employers or labor being paid wages and they were getting gift cards and pushing us into the positive. Oh. Okay. So, yes. So I'll just finish with this. So not only can we look at that aggregate picture of the architecture, all the sectors, but we can look individually and we can look at these communities and start thinking how to manage these communities. So this is a clustering where can we, you know, extend credit to some group that might increase velocity. So picking winners and deficit spending, the very traditional Keynesian type of approach, but having a backing with advertising is the model that we're taking, and it is a very, you know, it's a very interesting way to approach this. It's quite different, perhaps, from more orthodox models that are more, you know. So I will stop there.
I love your sophisticated way to look at those numbers in means of what can it do good. I have a provocative question. If that would be done exactly the same way and we would have the data and it would be based on the old dollar, what would be the difference for you?
You mean if we could map the dollar, the US dollar?
If you would have the same commercial and economical information data, you can make all your big data thing,
yeah,
but you had to use the dollar.
Yeah.
What would be different?
It would just be bigger, in my mind. It would just be bigger. So I'm coming from a school that has a lot of MMT academics. So they're right now doing Green New Deal proposals and proposing employer of last resort to reduce, for their goals, which is maximum unemployment and reduce inequality. And that's their idea, that's their vision for the government to spend, as long as it doesn't cause inflation. If it did, they would start draining it. So I don't actually see the difference. Perhaps you will tell me if
I
it should
think
be
the money
different.
would flow a different way. I think it's a different kind of money and it's moving in a different way. It's not about velocity only. It's about the direction the money goes, because it's a directed money. It's a value-based money and it's not a dollar. So that would be my theory, or my theory, and I would like to discuss this if it's a good point or it's just a wishful thinking.
I don't know if I am convinced, or maybe don't understand. Because if I had the mapping of the dollar network, yes, it would be different. It would be different communities, a whole different topology and demographic. But the method to me sounds the same. It sounds like you're hinting at maybe some more qualitative.
We had a conversation earlier about the value of education and questioning what money is. And so that value isn't in this quantitative data. And so it's also about education. So we recently started a catering company in order to get currents moving toward food.
I think my question is addressed to you. It's a question I have, but I think it might be an answer or pushing that discussion further. Because So it seems that the biggest spender there is the Hudson Valley current, do you call it,
I call it
accounts,
central bank
community
account,
accounts,
yeah.
whatever, which would be the fiscal authority in the dollar system, right? Now, how does that community account take decisions over their spending? How do they decide whether they spend in education, in non-profit on what social services to spend? Because that would direct the
That
money, as
answer.
you're asking, right?
Right.
Is how that's taken.
Mhm. In a way, we make decisions like water. We take the path of least resistance. And so we see this member needs currents. This member already has a lot of currents, so instead of hiring this web developer, we hire a different web developer.
I see.
So we see where the money needs to move.
So
and
you
then-
look at the account balances of the members
Yes.
to see where to spend.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very cool.
Because we have a lot of power within the
Yes.
system.
Who is we?
We have a board of directors, there's a staff of 4, and then we also have mixers every month in order to get people's voices at the same table.
You have what?
Networking events.
Events.
Yeah.
Okay. And the board of directors, how are they chosen? Are they elected by the members or how?
But no, they're elected by the board. So there's 5 members and we have 16 advisory board members. There's something that I saw in the charts in the first 2 years. It started growing and then it tanked because we had an implosion on the board. Conflict, drama, and then, because I used to invite anyone onto the board.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a lawyer? You want to be on the board? You know?
Yeah.
And then we had so much fighting that it almost became, it almost went away.
Dysfunctional.
Yeah. So now we have a new policy where we invite people to the advisory board. We get to know them, we have meetings, we have dinners, and then we elect people to the board.
But, so that is because that would be the difference there.
But what is the difference there? Isn't it that the federal government is making their choices, whatever they be, and we're making our choices,
Yes.
whatever they be? We're still using, in that scenario, we're still using.
What I'm referring to when I'm talking about the directed money,
Yeah,
it's restricted usage. The money is not accepted at 100% of acceptance places. And by choosing this ecosystem where the acceptance places are and also directing the money by influencing new channels, I call it new channels, you have an influence how intelligently it is used. And if it's an open dollar, it can be spent for cigarettes in the next city.
Exactly.
well, it's still within the country though, majority.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Can you estimate the opportunity cost for an average agent within the system against the real economy?
You mean against having dollars?
Yeah, if they
Substitute?
did their businesses in regular economy,
Yeah.
they would earn X amount of dollars.
Oh, it's pegged 1-to-1.
Yeah.
So,
Like compare it with the same activity performed within the system.
yeah.
Can you estimate what the
Substitution effect is that what you're saying? Yeah. Whether we're just replacing dollars?
right?
Yeah. That's hard.
Uh-huh.
We know we've changed lives. Do we? I mean, we do. We know certain non-profits at least are
Because
benefiting. They might be cross-subsidized.
Because I assume that
community.
if there is a difference, that the participant pays a price for participating, but the difference is compensated by different means. What you meant, like changing lives, right?
Well, just that certain non-profits don't get credit from the bank, but might get credit from us. They may not pay it back, but it will be subsidized by the community. Hopefully they pay it back, but if they don't,
So it can go both ways. That some people might lose, some participants,
Yes.
by participating, but some might gain.
well, it's hard to lose only because there's usually a business out there where either you can get a meal through a gift card at a restaurant, and those businesses can advertise. So we might be forcing businesses, encouraging businesses to advertise when they wouldn't want to advertise. They might feel like, oh, I've got all these credits now, I need to advertise. So we probably are increasing the amount of advertising in our area for the businesses, which for us, I think that's okay. The businesses are subsidizing through that, but they get something for it. Maybe it's not their first choice, but they're helping to subsidize the other people in the community who aren't a business and who otherwise aren't necessarily participating as much as they want. So the goal is to increase total utilization of capacity.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
So we will have our next speaker. Yeah.
I'm second year PhD student at University of Quebec on Ontario. So it's my first presentation in the conference. I'm very happy to be here. So I will be speaking on network analysis. And to explain a little bit why I got this work is that in France, now many important complementary currencies are connecting to digital. So like the euro, you have heard about in the last days, but also the blue, the KM, the Benelux, the Monto. Many of the important complementary currencies are connecting to digital, and so it makes transactions that are available. And during my first year of PhD, I asked myself, what can we do with this new data? It opened a lot of possibility for analysis and research on these objects. I get an access to the Sonance transaction data, which is a complementary currency, which is digital since its creation in 2015. And it's only digital, there is no paper in this framework. So I have been doing preliminary work to investigate which kind of analysis I can build with this transaction data. And I propose 3 kinds of works in this presentation: network analysis, work on the velocity of work on what I call a network multiplier. So I'll explain it. To begin, I will explain a little bit what the Sonance project is and what data I get from it. So the Sonance is a local complementary currency circulating around Nantes in Brittany, in the Atlantic, sorry, French department. It has been launched in 2015 by the Crédit Municipal de Nantes, which is a semi-public organization. So it's not an association-driven currency. At the beginning, it was really a public will to launch a currency in the area, and it was immediately in digital. In 2017, it had the initial scheme changes. At the beginning, they have 2 schemes called Sonance. One was for the businesses, where they can do barter, so with credit lines, they can exchange with treatment, and one scheme for more consumers, who can exchange euros in Sonance. In 2017, they closed the barter. Also, only the one-to-one exchange complementary currency remain, but businesses can exchange in this currency too. But because of this change in 2017, I decided to restrict the analysis for the year 2018. So that's it's main argument. In 2017 also, the management of the currency has changed from the Crédit Municipal de Nantes to an association, which is now managing the Sonance. To show you a little bit some number on the Sonance, so to identify this project, it's a quite small project. So in the year 2018, it was less than 2,000 transactions, but with a maximum amount of 5,000 and an average amount of 66. The total transaction volume is around 130,000. So for the money supply, it was 100,000 Sonance in circulation in 2018, with a lot of manipulation, but quite also the same amount of money destruction. Money destruction is when a professional or mostly a professional decides to exchange its Sonance in euro back. So it destroys something. It was 300 users, 90 producers, in the network at this time. So I have done a small network analysis. The methodology was inspired by Frank Van Hall and Yusufidis and Hall. We have already done some network analysis on complementary currency, but it was on Let's scheme or on B2B, so barter scheme for Let's scheme is Frank Van and Yusufidis to the Sardex, so a big barter. So it's the first time that I do it on a new object, another object, that is this currency where the money creation is an exchange of euros in currency. So it's a centralized, it's not a decentralized money creation, but it's more centralized. So no, not much. To do the network analysis, as you can see on the first graph, there are all users, the red point is consumers. I put them all in one point because I'm more interested in the exchange between businesses than in the exchange than in the consumption. So I put them all in one point, and this bank here is La Cementez, so the association. These 2 points drive a lot of the exchanges, so I decided to remove them to better see how the money will circulate after in the network. And so we see that La Cementez stay here because I remove only the transaction from the member to La Cementez. The member can pay their annual cotisation to La Cementez each month, so they are all linked to La Cementez. And if you see that in the network, it's artificially change the exchange, change what you can observe. So I just let the payment from La Cementez to the network in my analysis. This choice really downsize the sum. It means that without the transaction to the Cementez, we are only 65 active professional members in the network in 2018 compared to the 91 that we have on the first one. And but the transaction volume is something like half of the transaction volume of all the networks. So the business are quite active. It's not only consumer that comes to business and then the money do not circulate. They are doing exchange between them. To my conclusion on this network analysis, there are, if you go back to the graph, but we see that the network is quite fragmented. Here you have some small business partners that are just exchanging between them. And so the circulation is not very harmonious. You have these things. And we observe also 20 few whales. What I call whales are users, so producers that receive semantics or never use it in the network during the year. So they are quite a lot, and they receive 30,000 sonants without using them. It's quite a big issue. And 19 approved providers, so they inject sonants and they never receive them. So the network is fragmented, and it needs the links to make the money circulate more. Maybe some actors are missing that could build links between the ones that are circulate and the ones that gives and are never playing together. Inspired from Isophilis and all, I compute the gas cycles. So the gas cycles scale is the number of cycles. It's the length of cycles that you can find in your graph. So as it is a directed graph, so for example, the biggest one, it's when users compute a full cycle, so one user is spending money, and at the end he receives in the same cycles. There is very few in the graph. There is only 5 cycles of length 2, it means that 3 users are exchanging together, and only 1 cycle of length 5, and nothing in between. So there are very few cycles. So that means that the cycles will allow the money to come back. So it's the same problem as the world. So it's just another way to see it. So the money is never coming back to the beginning. For the general indicators on the graph, it's a very low density with high reciprocity. It means that often users are two playing together. So they just are transitivity, so it's when they are free playing together. The average path length is very small too, so every users are quite close from the other. In average, if you want to find from one user another one, it's in average 3. And the degree distribution follows power rules. It means that the number of connections of one node, a lot of nodes have very few, have 1 or 2 connections, and after there are very few nodes that have lots. And all these characteristics are similar to the small networks, which are very classical in network analysis and very common in if you are analyzing Facebook data or things like that. You will find often small word properties for the link between the actors. And I also look at the nodes, the actors themselves, to find which one are the most important. So we can see it a bit on the graph. The big ones receive a lot of transaction, but no, they receive a lot of money. And for example, this free one, they receive a lot of money. They are spending the 5,000, the transaction of 5,000 is between this one, but they are spending just 1 time in the year. They are using money 1 time in the year because it's one is the owner of the others, so they pay their rent, part of their rent inside. That's why and so when we look at the indicators to see which actors has most importance, it's quite coherent, except of the strength, it means that the weight in the networks, which is not so much correlated with the activity in the network. So you can have a huge amount for some users, but they are not trading a lot.
Now we are downloading virus onto the computer.
I find that the network analysis is very useful to see how the network is going, if it is in good health, and to see which kind of actors are missing to complete the circulation. But I missed some, when I was doing my study, my research, I missed some more analytical things to see really the impact of this network for itself. So I try to complete more indicators that summarize the information. The first one is very common, is the velocity. So it comes from the Fisher identity, it's quite old. And is often used for complementary currency to say that they are very efficient because the velocity is high. When I get deep into this question, I was less convinced because what I found is that monetary velocity at the beginning was more defined as an adjustment variable. So we have the projection, we have the monetary mass, the monetary mass, and then you compute the velocity just by making the ratio between the both. And at the beginning, it was more a variable to make the equation work. So, but it's here just to make. So when you increase the velocity of a money, it can also say that you don't have enough money in the network, and so they have to exchange very quickly. But it's not necessarily a good thing. It's more an adjustment variable than an active variable. It can be disputed. It's just an idea that comes to me when I read the literature and when I do my computation. For the sonars in 2018, the velocity was quite low, so 1.21. And the question was also to what can we compare this velocity? The best will be 0 velocity. I would like to compare it to the euro velocity, but it's quite hard to compute. It's not so easy. Often we find the GDP over monetary mass, but as in the I will have it on the other one. So we have the GDP over mass velocity, but in the transaction data, it's not the GDP you have, it's not the added value, it's really the exchange. So, and the exchange are quite higher than the added value, the pure added value. So you can't compare those. What I choose to do, and it's not completely convenient, is to compare to the turnover of the firms, but it was quite hard to find the turnover for all the firms in 2018 in France. It's not a very simple data. And in 2016, because the 2018 data are not known now. And for the PIB, GDP over 1 in France in 2016, it was 2.68 velocity. And when you take the turnover, it's 4.72. And I think that if you take all the transactions with the credit card, you are more than something like 10 velocities of 10 or something like that. So it's really different. In all the cases, the velocity of the sonnet is really low. But according to the Lausanne study of 2015, it's close to the US currency in 2018 or US Catalina in 2020. That is something like 1.6, I think. 1.6 or I propose another indicators that for me is closer to the circulation of how the money is going. When you do an injection, how the money will circulate inside the network. So it's an application of Sachs methodology and the local multiplier to the local complementary currency network. So I call it a network multiplier because we stay in the network. So. And I think it summarizes more the impact of the initial injection on the local economy. To compute it, I compute the share of sonants used by the consumers in the last for each businesses, with to which they give money, and then I compute for each businesses the share of the used sonants, the share of received sonants used by the business after the day. And I do it on 3 ways. And then the multiplication of these 3 ways gives us a number that is quite a multiplier. My big issue with this, I find it quite amazing, but is that we don't have any counterfactual to compare it. A little bit like the GDP over one things. This time we don't have something that, say in France, if you spend €1 to someone, it will do so many euros after. So the result of this network multiplier, when I take the consumer expenses in the network, so they spend 40,000 sonants in the network in 2018, and the number of 2.17 means that it generated something like 19,000 sonants of income in this network. The second multiplier I compute is the professional expenses. So, the professionals sometimes exchange euro and sonant too. And and I look when they are looking back to which other firm they are trading. And this one is really lower, because it means that when the professional exchange is euro and sonants, the people to whom they give it doesn't use it after that. So they are blocked on the second part. And for the professional stock use, this one is the more artificial one. In the year, some professionals use more sonants than they received. So it means that they have stopped from the last year, that they are using in the network. And so the network multiplier for this one is 1.71. So it's in between So it's quite more effective for a consumer to spend. It's more the consumer consumption that create value in the network than when businesses are exchanging videos. So for conclusion, these are really preliminary works. So there are many leads that I can follow on these things. We try to understand and see how a complementary currency may impact the economic activity of its members, what it brings to them, and all the value is created in this network. I would really like to compare the Solent network analysis to other complementary currency networks. And I think that it's more of things that will be more interesting to compare many and to see the differences and which one are doing well and which ones are not. And I think I should theoretically deepen the work on velocity and on the network multiplier with more theory and also more transaction data to compare. So, thanks for your attention.
The Sachs article that you referred to in terms of the multiplier effect, is that the best resource that you found in terms of measuring multiplier?
Yeah, it's on another one is Canada. It's a source, yeah. That's the question you want.
The question is, are there other resources other than Sachs that are as good or
For now,
different?
it's really Sachs because it was very empirical. So it was a methodology to do multipliers for not only for research. So it was quite effective. But I think that I will deepen my work to look at post-Canadian and Canadian references because multiplier and local multiplier they are the ground from this kind of work. So I will deepen in this field. There is another one that is easy to access, with a bit less of this Canada, 2008. It's also a good resources to really find how you empirically can compute some multiplier.
Thanks.
Yeah.
How many people live in the region that Sonantes is used?
I think something like a little bit less than 1 million. So it's really small.
Yes, I got a question for the velocity of money, because it seems to me you have the number of transactions in your data.
Yeah.
You have the monetary basis.
Yeah. No, for a complementary currency, it's like that. It's for the euro that is much higher. It's to find the comparison point. So the complementary currency are perfect.
Okay.
It's really you have to know what you need.
Two questions. The first one is because before I arrived at this presentation 1 year ago, some people in France thought that the Solent project was in a huge crisis and actually collapsed. So maybe you spoke about that at the beginning of your presentation, but could you just tell us a bit more about this crisis and what happened from that? And my second question is concerning velocity. A big talk with Jen Stoddard about how to calculate velocity. So he did his studies on the VIR, and actually VIR is not a barter system, it's not mutual credit. It is actually an issued currency, which works actually as a commercial bank, and they just issue currency, and they issue it as a credit, and they consider themselves as being a mutual bank. So that's why they thought there would be a mutual credit at the beginning of the story, but they are not. Anyway, so for the VIR, it made the calculation, so velocity is always a flow divided by a stock. And for the comparison you've been always doing, in the case of the conventional money, national currency, what it told me that you should always consider the flow as the GDP and the stock as the global money supply, which is actually M3 and not M1. And yes, so this is what I wanted to say. And then my question is not for you, it's just that for issued currencies seems to be easy to calculate the velocity, but for mutual credit it's a bit more complicated, and I still don't have the answer. I believe we spoke about that yesterday. So anyway, actually my question is more about the crisis in Sono.
Yeah, it's a crisis. So I don't, I was just focusing on it as an background, so I don't really know the scheme. They are in big crisis, so my relationship are not going well. But they are still working. That was the question. They are still working, and they want to. There is another currency around that is more agricultural. And they want to merge together to maybe have an higher scale with
To merge with an agricultural network, you said?
Yes.
Yeah,
All right.
go, I guess.
And for the further, also, of course I have research. The question of GDP is really a big question for me, and I come back to Fisher and to Friedman. And it's two kinds of velocities that it can equal, but in Fisher he says that when you calculate the GDP, it's not really velocity, it's very interesting. Because you see how monetary mass can produce added value, but it's not a transaction. GDP is far away from transaction. GDP is only the added value. When you do a transaction, there is all the other value, all your intermediate consumption are in the product you're paying when you pay when you pay something, so you farm or a computer, you're not just paying the seller, you're paying all the intermediate consumption that are behind. And so when you take the transaction is really the price of the computer, not only the price of what you have to give to the seller.
But then why M1, which is only notes and coins instead of M3?
So M1 is the same thing, is from Fisher and so on.
All right.
It's because, and also for the complementary currency is very close to M1, so you only speak about cash. And so to compare it to the complementary currency is more interesting to take M1.
Which won't be the case in the case of digital currency, though.
Also because it's not meant to be stored, so you will never have interest in it. So it's not assets, it's kind of assets. It's really liquid. It makes to circulate, not to stay stuck.
All right.
Excuse me, before the end, I have to go to another room, but I would like to do an announcement or a reminder for the General Assembly. For those who are members of RAMICS, its General Assembly is at 4:40, and so everyone, of course, every member is welcome to the General Assembly. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe add a few words concerning the management of Sona. So I met with Frederic Perrin, the coordinator right now of the Sona, and they are actually having a totally new management team, and they are even trying to figure out a new digital solution for the money. They were working with POS terminal before, so with card payment, but they were too costly and not very handy for the users, so now they're working on a mobile solution. I can give you the name of the guy if you want to know more about.
All right. And you know which mobile solution they are looking for?
They are still on the phase of,
yeah.
All
right. Thank you.
So sure, I understood what you meant by total turnover, but because if you, I understand why we should not use GDP to measure the velocity of circulation, but why not use the total product? It's actually the figure will be pretty close to what you mentioned as a total turnover, so 4,000 billion something in France.
I'm not sure what the total product.
Total product is GDP plus intermediate consumption. And this has the advantage to be available for, I mean, in the Fonds de la Nation.
It's the same thing that the turnover, because you know the difference. There's a difference between the turnover. You know it, or because like that I look.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat again?
You know the difference between total turnover and total product?
I think it seems to be quite small, but it seems to exist.
Okay.
It's about 100 billions. I mean, compared to the whole mass, it's not so big.
Okay.
But I don't know if if you thought about taking, using the, why did you actually consensually have you chosen to use it instead of the product?
The turnover, I've come back to the complementary currency. We can say that all the money they receive is that turnover in the complementary currency. So it's really what they get. So that's why I choose that turnover for comparison. But I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. Yeah. So very.
No. Hi. So last night I was having dinner with Carol from the Calgary, I was having dinner with Will from the Kenyan currencies, and I was having dinner with you from or representing the Hudson Valley. And one of the questions that you nicely formulated is, how do we make these themes, the community currencies, be relevant for the world? We've been over here for over 10 years having these conferences. Some of us have been running relatively successful community currencies for over 20 years. And yet here we are. Economists just found out about us 6 months ago. How do we become relevant? That's really the question that concerns me. How do these kind of grassroots innovations diffuse so that they become really an established, taken for granted tool that we can use, that communities can use, that anybody can use to solve their social challenges? Yeah? I'm approaching that question from an urban studies and grassroots innovation studies perspective. And that's a little bit different to the velocity of money we've been talking about now, and multipliers and all that thing. It's very much looking at communities, how they use, and how they're starting up their currencies, how they tinker with it, how they do. So what I'm going to do to study the diffusion of one, at least, and how they've been doing and how they are doing, is look at the history of the Kenyan community currencies and look at what kind of strategies or what kind of traits make them possible to diffuse. Yeah? So I'm coming from urban studies, where they don't define money this way. This is just taken quickly from the program itself, where we've been discussing money as credit, as discursive institutions, as social relations, and money social capital, urban studies would approach our infrastructure as a melange, as an arrangement of things and people and flows and ideas that connect, right? That connect. Either the water infrastructure is made by the companies and the pipes and the water itself that has, or the cleaning thing that sort of makes that the water gets to the home. In urban studies, they will look at money as an infrastructure that connects flows of exchange, people and merchandise and material things and people. But it's also, and this is what I find particularly interesting in the urban studies approach, infrastructures not only connect, they disconnect, right? Just as the road we saw before, we're thinking of roads as connecting two cities, but we don't think of roads as disconnecting and really, really disconnecting everything that the roads doesn't lead to. So these two parts of the city are way more disconnected since that road was constructed and all. And so that's what money does. If you take an urban infrastructures approach to it, our established monetary systems are disconnecting many of the vulnerable communities in our societies. This is very blatant in the Kenyan context. This is a picture, not of the Kenyan context, but of the Argentina, where you have the equivalent to the informal settlements. So in that perspective, community currencies, and this is how urban studies would approach them, are infrastructures for the interstices, for the in-betweens, for the margins, for those people for which the established infrastructure, the established roads, the established pipelines don't get to it. So what these communities are doing, they are developing their own monetary, if you want, their own financial infrastructures to be able to be part of an economy. Okay? They're not only constructing the economy, they are constructing the infrastructures for the economy. So it's really basic groundwork they're doing. And it's very important that within that context, and framing it that way, it's very important to understand how do we diffuse these infrastructures. How do we make these groups the stronger practices, what strategies they use, so that we can, you know, be big, be relevant, quick. Solve these challenges quick. This is telling what I've told you, but in a different way. So the take on over infrastructures is not just the material aspects of it. We would be talking about money, we would be talking about backing and reserves and all the resources that are put into it. It's also how we build those connections, how the social relations are shaped and maybe engineered even so that it supports a particular design of the currency, and how the cultural practices that they may have in the communities, the cultural understandings they bring to money, and are also stitched together in the design of those monetary systems. Okay, so it's infrastructures in a very hybrid way of understanding them, not just material aspects, but the social and the cultural aspects of it too. Yeah. The other approach that I'm taking is the grassroots innovations approach, where the main question in that field, and that's where I'm coming from, is your question from last night. So how do we diffuse these innovations so that everybody can enjoy them, so that we can actually actively use it as a tool for our communities? Yeah. So I'm taking the case of the Kenyan community currencies. I've mainly been doing some field work since the fall of 2017, the fall of 2018, and now in the spring of 2019, interviewing users, interviewing Will. Some of you are interviewing some of grassroots economics employees and officers and field officers, various actors around that kind of infrastructure, grassroots infrastructure. And observing how they use or not use, how they spend, how they price their products, how they make available resources that they didn't have before, so that they can feed the infrastructure, the system. And I'm going to start with the beginning of the Kenyan tale. And it started, you may have to remind me of the year, but it started 2010, 2011 with the Eco Pesa, which was a currency that was really backed by donor funds, one-to-one, as I've understood, and it was released through waste collection events, right? And so then the typical, they would use it for whatever, to trade or to buy some food, and then eventually the businesses would redeem against donor funds. Traditional, or that way. As an infrastructure, as a grassroots infrastructure, it did help build the waste infrastructure. So tons of waste was collected. Businesses were saying also that the food security infrastructure was also working. That businesses at least were selling more than they were selling previously. There was a decrease, I think it's here. No, it's not here. But the youth witnessed of improved employment, mainly because through the waste collection events that were paid for. So as the basis for all the grassroots infrastructures, this was working. There were some challenges. One is, once the donor funds have been redeemed or have been cashed, that's it, that's when the infrastructure dies. So as such, it's not a resilient one that would allow us to be relevant. And then the dependency on donors. Yeah? So then there was, okay, let's see how we do this so that it becomes a relevant infrastructure for this community, but also so that we can replicate it and diffuse the infrastructure to other communities. And so, bringing knowledges from other currencies, and I think this is an important phase, for this particular grassroots infrastructure. We see it in others, but in this one is particularly the case. And this conference is an example of how practitioners, how last night you exchanged experiences of how you're doing or not doing. So drawing on global networks of knowledge, learning from other currency systems, you brought those ideas and developed the Bangla Pesa. The grassroots economy developed the Bangla Pesa, where it's a cooperative. What is that? That's interesting. Okay, so it's a business. A Bangladesh business network was formed, so a network of businesses that agreed to accept the Bangla Pesa and to use the Bangla Pesa. very much like a barter network, in a way. And an innovation, a grassroots innovation was introduced, one that is used already in the local table banks, so that the communities have traditionally saved in groups, in table banks, and when they accept new members that they don't know from before, they ask for 4 guarantors, so that in case that member defaults, the guarantors would intervene, right? So that innovation, which is really rooted in the community structures that are already there, it's an idea that is already existing and well proven there, was introduced in the Bangladesh. And then the business liaisons, which is an innovation, so it doesn't build for the community. But it's taking relations and cultural ideas and cultural practices that already existed in the community. That helped, that connected another variety of infrastructure, so from local micro businesses or local businesses were reporting increase in sales. Women in particular are a member of these kinds of monies. They were reporting easier to pay school fees, more food in the table. I've heard of people that say now I eat more varied food, so rice, not only chapati, that kind of things. And it made something that they almost every single person I've interviewed in those areas have spoken, it's not only that, it actually has given us a visibility that has allowed us to negotiate with the county or with the municipality. They had this main road, this main path that gets into the informal settlement, that is, in other informal settlements you see, it's just dust, dirt. When it rains, it's muddy. It's the source of a lot of sicknesses, the waste is over there, it's really not very happy. What the currency system did is that it gave them a collective voice, a capacity to organize, and a visibility towards the local authorities. And in pre-election time, that's to negotiate the votes, if you want, or threaten to withdraw their votes if they didn't get the road paved. So again, it's helping them to connect to other actors, but to bring together other kind of infrastructural development. The problem, though, with this currency was the management of the cooperative, if you want, or the network of businesses was demanding. That was one. People often told, some of them told that they forgot to pay their bills, so that sometimes they wanted to pay, but realized, oh, I don't have them, which also disconnects. And then as these currencies were diffusing to other communities, and maybe communities that were located near to each other wanted to trade with each other, there was not really the possibility to trade across them. Wasn't that easy. Then you have the next iteration. So there was a limit to the diffusion because of this. The next iteration, when you have this, it's already old because you're already iterating into this blockchain-based solution, but it was then inspired by the knowledges of the crypto world. So okay, instead of having a community that has to agree on giving each other mutual credits, and we airdrop it. We mint it from the social venture that is organizing this, and airdrop it into the people that want businesses and people that want to register. Whereas in the previous one there was no proper reserve system in the sense of another currency being acting as a reserve, but here there is partly a reserve system by the donors. And there is whereas in the second version there was no possibility to redeem the currency, in this one there is a fiat gateway, so that 10% of the members' account balances per week can be redeemed or converted into cash. Yeah. Here you see the possibility actually to trade across currencies. You see, he's choosing what currency to trade with. So it's also connecting the currencies. Yeah. This is just a summary of the three models, just to try to compare quickly. We can go through that, but I think you've gotten the big picture of what the three versions are. And I'd like to discuss then what are the what makes, what traits in these grassroots innovations allow or enable the diffusion of these currencies? What do we need to strengthen so as to make ourselves relevant? To phrase it as Gerald was phrasing it yesterday. That is really my question. How do these grassroots infrastructures diffuse? That's really back to my original question. And if we look at the three versions, we see that they are really, the answer is really, we don't have one single definition of money. We don't have one single definition of how it has to be. We don't have one single definition of what kind of values have to guide it. It's all very malleable. And I think there is a strength into being stubborn about not defining who you are. Not who you are, what these innovations are and how they have to be, but actually giving a space for them to adapt and change. The four dimensions in which these at least were malleable was one is in how they conceive money, in what is often called the ontology of money. So in the first version, it's more closer to a metalistic view of money, where there has to be a reserve, 100% backing it. Whereas in the second version was closer to a chartalist version, where money is really credit. And in the third is something in between. There's a mental flexibility among users and founders and workers and everybody on what this is. We don't care really. We're not sticking into definitions. There's a dual set of principles really grounding many economic relations. There's on the one side a very strong ideal of communism of access. So it's not communism in the sense of property, everything is everybody's, but of access. No matter how strong your business is, or how weak your business is, or how big your needs are, everybody is accepted in the community, communism of access. And everybody is given the same initial amount of credit, or airdrop the same amount of money. Now, once the access is communized, if you want, the requirements on each other are very reciprocal. So whereas communism assumes that human relations are unequal, no matter how bad you are, you're welcome, the other one, a value of reciprocity, assumes that human relations are equal. It's a tick for tack, it's the ideology of the market. I give you this, you give me money, equal the same value. So it's reciprocity and mutuality or solidarity are two very different values. And they're working with both at the same time. They're assuming an equality and equality on the same in the same sentence. This that all of us work very much with, so there are monies that are immobilized, geographically, to accelerate the movement geographically, right? And it is that immobilization that helps the monies and each other embed those currencies wider or deeper into the fabric of the community. That's why they know they can use the four guarantors. If they're immobilized there, we don't want it to move elsewhere to get. So let's strengthen through community relations, through the guarantors, through the table banks, through the business vessels. And then this fourth one, I'm still working on this one. It reaches them, the users, not only because it solves their food needs, not only because they now can pay partly the school fees, not only because of the material aspects of it, but also because of the affective aspect of it. Because now and the social aspect of it. So now they can organize and mobilize and go to the city board and say, we want our road paved. Or they say, no, I was there now last week, and Emma, you maybe have interviewed her this time. Emma, this big woman with a lot of character, was telling me, and now the Bangla Pesa is going down, there's quite a few problems and challenges in that community, and we were talking about, she's a Luo from Kisumu where I'm working, and we were talking about, just joking about, well, so why, no, we're launching a currency there, you could go over there and move to Kisumu. No. The Bangla Pesa is the mother of all pesas, and not moving from here. There is a strong affective, it reaches them in their hearts. And which is something that I think these currencies these grassroots innovations build on, why does it do that? These grassroots innovations build on build on to mobilize people and be able to respond. Yeah? So that openness also allows the communities or the entrepreneur or the field workers to tinker continuously with the currencies. And I think that malleability and tinkering are two aspects of the same coin. Because we can always constantly play with a lot of variables, we can constantly adapt this infrastructure to what is going on right now in the community. Yeah? So very quickly, what are the, I've had a 1 minute note, so very, very quickly, otherwise we can take this on the discussion. No, it's super good, this is how it has to be. Just two, I'm going to just focus on two. One is what are the implications of this for our discussions here at the academic level, and what are the practical implications? At the academic level is, I find in my field, in urban studies, in many fields, an obsession with defining things as they are. Finding the one ontology of money in our case, or of infrastructures, or of what it is. And in fact, that might be detrimental to the very purpose of our investigations, right? What we want is this openness to think free about what money is, about what infrastructures are and what. The other one is that this calls for a discussion across disciplines. Because if money has three vectors, if money is material and social and cultural, we need the anthropologists, we need Reber, talking us about the meaning of money. We need the sociologists, we need Session7B, talking about the relations behind it, and we need the economists, talking about. Yeah.
So is the 10% that you can convert back, is that like a drain to the system? And is that something that's balancing supply? Like maybe, is that the purpose of that, or, you know,
So,
what?
he can answer you better. As I see it, urban scholar, as I see, at the moment it is a drain to the system. Now the question is that drain needed? Is that drain is needed in terms, if we were thinking about it as an economist, as the monetary supply, is that drain needed because there is too much money? I don't think so. But it's needed because they do need to convert. So I was there now last week. There's been a really bad rainy season. On the way to this little village, every single maize field was dry. I mean, really dry. It was sad to see. I was harvesting with them. That was barely anything. This season, they're eating because they can exchange that 10% of their balances. They've exchanged it. They've in the table banks, they've saved the sarafu. Then they've gone together, several table banks, 5 of them. They've gone and bought 18 sacks of maize in Kenyan shillings. So they've converted the sarafu savings to Kenyan shillings. They've bought the 18 sacks of maize into Kenyan shillings. That's your fiat. They broke out those sacks. They've milled them in the community, and now they're selling the flour fully, 100% in sarafu. That means they're eating. They were not before. So there is a need in terms of the food insecurity infrastructure, building that infrastructure. But in terms of the monetary mass, not because the system needs to be drained of money so as not to create inflation and all those. Does that answer?
Because they need access to cash because of external imports.
They need, at the moment, they need access to Kenyan shillings because there is no food in the community. They haven't been able this season to produce enough food for themselves. Yeah.
But what in an emergency, you know, maybe they need 20%. Can they negotiate? No.
You ask Will.
The goal there is like, well, we have a donor in the Netherlands who wants to promote food security. And so basically we've created a collateral fund that they can draw from. And as they do so, that also, as that collateral drops, so does the price of exchange that they get drops as well. And so it gives the ability now for people like these savings groups to actually buy the swapo at preferable rates and fill that collateral back up. So the idea is that they own those collateral funds, and the currency is a credit against that collateral. Right? So they can top back up that collateral, they can draw it back out. That's going to have an effect on their tokens. And we're moving away from it being us as the issuer, where it's they're issuing their own credit backed by their own reserves, and aid agencies can come in and fill up those reserves. Like, so instead of just doing cash transfer programs like Red Cross does, they will transfer cash into a seed fund, and then they can create a credit on that seed fund. And they can draw from it, but that's going to lower the value of their credit, and they can also add to it and create their own backings. They're kind of becoming local banks, in other words. So, I mean, whether or not there's ever going to be a case where there's no need at all for outside intervention, well, I hope so. And right now there's something like we're measuring like how much circulation and the supply relative to that number, and I think one of my slides earlier today I had it there, and it's at least in the last 6 months it's been something like in terms of the volume of trade compared to what you would get with Kenyan shillings, something like 21 times what you would get with that same amount of donor funds. So if you would just use the donor funds to try to buy them food, you would have gotten 21 times less food in that community. So it's effective in that sense, and whether or not they're ever going to get to the stage where they're absolutely never going to have any donor funds, I don't know. I hope so, and we're hoping to see them. By the end of this year, they're starting their own programs completely independently as well.
But my view on that, on the donor funds, we need donors. You need donors, but maybe the point at the moment, without those kind of communities, is to be able to become independent of the donors. But the question here, and the question that I think this solution opens up, is that instead of the donors deciding how to invest their money, what to buy for food, or whether to put, is the community themselves deciding, okay, we are collecting this, we are deciding what we're going to spend those donor funds on. Are we going to put it on the school fees? Are we going to put it on maize this season? We need maize. And in that sense, they are much more reactive to their own local needs. The donors, it takes the time it takes to do the application, and then they have to go and assess it. And they're not reactive to what's going on in the community. So in that sense, I believe this system it gives some of the power of the donors to the community.
There'll be a poster, I think, downstairs that describes how the Red Cross wants to start implementing these programs. We've been working with them for a while now, and so it kind of goes through that from
I noticed some people weren't showing up to the EcoPace meetings. That was one of the.
For the Bangla Pesa, the second version.
The Bangla?
Yeah.
What is the democratizing component of Sarah food?
So at the version before June, this is a model that is changing very fast. Version before June, there was no democratizing components. Now they are trying to build on existing community structures. So in Kenya, you go to any park on Kisumu is the city I know better. You go to a park on Tuesdays at 8 in the morning. You see the park full of these colorful plastic chairs, and people are sitting in groups of 20, 25 more or less. They're sitting in circles on the chairs, just giving money, putting the money on a plate. The plate circulates, and they barely talk. They just give it.
What kind of money?
They're Kenyan shillings. They're putting it together, collecting the savings, weekly savings, every week. And then they go around and ask every member for what needs they have for that week. If the sum of loans they need is bigger than what they've managed to collect together, they negotiate who gets the loan and who knows. That's super established. I've seen it in Mombasa, I've seen it in Nairobi, I've seen it in Kisumu. I've seen it in the vulnerable. The professor I work with in Kisumu belongs to a couple of table banks. So it's all over. So now what Sarafu is doing is that building on those community structures. That's again back to this tweaking of the infrastructure by using what already is relational, the relational knowledge and practices they already have, to help these groups or to use these groups to save or to be able to pull together larger amounts of sarafu so as to, when there is a crisis like now, they can go and buy maize. Or they can do, and as a group decide how to invest it in a community. So the democratization aspect right now is at the level of the chamas, as they're called, or the table banks.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We're really excited, hopefully, by the end of the year, that in the way they're using Sarafu, there's also going to be voting built into the system itself. And so like voting on things like, can they collect a tax, what are the basic rules in the system, and that basically the holders of those tokens will end up having sort of kind of like a voting token that they can assign to different outcomes. So I'm almost more excited about that than I am the currency itself, just because I think that there's so much room for democracy to start kind of flourishing in that way, and it's a way to bring democracy right into your pocket, because the voting structures, a lot of them that they have, are, it's like hand raising and everyone's looking around, and it's not always great. There's not, we do build on a lot of the existing structures, and there are some that are amazing. And the Catholic Relief Services has built this thing called the Silk method. It's just like a tabletop banking groups, and they're very positive. They're by far the best local community banking